Oh wait, did I post this on the classroom? Hey folks, it's February the 3rd, and for our dual credit 1301 course, we're going to go over more of some of the laws and the actions of the British that really got under the skin of the American colonist, and it's going to lead to the American Revolution. I'm going to double check real quick to see if I have posted the notes because I just realized that I'm talking over my slides and my notes that I created for you, but I might not have put them on the Google Classroom. So I'm going to go ahead and check that right now. I have posted some study guides for you. And so make sure you spend some time reading over those. The materials in there, if you get to where you know these and you remember them well, it's really going to help you out as we come across the end of the year test, so you can exit the course and get your high school credits. Okay. We want that. But I see that I did not post it on the Google Classroom. So you go ahead and put that material in. I'm going to title it 1301 History DC American Revolution notes. Spacebar doesn't work on this computer. Click. Go ahead and add the attachment. I'm going to save it as a PDF for you.
What is it with Italy right now?
I know they're having a lot of problems where their government's kind of like having I think their prime minister resigned. They were having some problems before that. A lot of it has, a lot of Europe's actually had, unlike America, now we've had some spotty ones, but Europe in like Norway, Germany, Italy, there have been massive, large-scale protests against COVID lockdowns because they've been locked down really hard, and they've had a lot of.
They're doing way better than we are.
Yeah. So I mean, the people are kind of getting upset though because so many of them have lost their businesses and stuff like that. And even though they've had like vaccinations and they've been following the rules, they're still told they can't go out and stuff. So they're kind of getting really upset about it. That's not all Europeans, but I mean there's a lot more unrest over there.
Are we headed that direction?
I don't know.
Not
There have been protests against like vaccinations and the mask and stuff like that,
not
but
the protests, but just the massive lockdown.
massive lockdown. I don't know. Like there's rumors that they have found other COVID strains. But the thing is like, I don't know. Right?
Well, there were 18 strains before this COVID.
Yeah. I don't know. But some people are a little let down because they kind of thought that once you had the vaccination would lead to less restrictions. I mean, like here in Tyler, it hasn't been that bad since like last year, really.
Yeah.
I mean, you can still pretty much go anywhere you want to. Some businesses
Just gotta
ask
wear a
that you
mask.
do this, do this and that. Like, and some of them might even have limits on how many people are in, and they have that the right to do that, and people have the right to comply or go somewhere else. But there's some places, like if you look at California, they've just lessened some of their restrictions, so that might be a good sign. I think it depends on the state. Some people criticize that there's not a national standard, but some people are like, well, thank goodness, because if we all did the wrong thing, that'd be terrible. So I don't know. I guess that's one of the beautiful things about federalism is that some of us can do, we can all do experiments, and some of them succeed, some of them fail, but hopefully people will mimic the ones that succeed. Let's see how this one goes, though. Let's see how it goes. I don't know what to make of it. I don't know. I always want to err on the side of freedom, though, because it's my personal bias. Here, let's go ahead and open up where we were at last time. We're not doing a warm up today, but we are going to do a warm up tomorrow. Well, no, wait. Friday. Yeah, it's Wednesday. All right, that's who that is. That was Edmund Burke. Edmund Burke. I don't know why I put his picture up here, but Edmund Burke's like a curious guy. Like I put up his picture like last time I made a lecture on last Friday. So Edmund Burke was a member of Parliament, but unlike most members of Parliament, he wasn't born in England. He was actually born in Ireland, and he immigrated to England and became an English citizen. And because he was from Ireland and because he was Catholic, he was kind of treated as an outsider, but he was a very intellectual guy. And he's like the only member of Parliament who actually told the other members of Parliament, you can't impose these kinds of restrictions and taxations on the American colonists the way you are. It's not moral. It's not right. And he's also going to be one of the only ones that's actually going to kind of defend the American Revolution. However, years later, he's going to talk about how bad the French Revolution is. So he's one of those guys who, like, Americans are like, yeah, we can agree with that guy. I almost forgot. I made an assignment for you Monday. I had to take the day off to take care of some things at home, but you still need to go in and do that. It has to do with Sentinel-1, Anti-Federalist paper, and Federalist 10, which they're generally, they're not like necessarily writing against one another, but they are vaguely, because one's against the adoption of the Constitution because they thought it went against the Revolution. The other is for the adoption of the Constitution because they believe it did. So remember, all right, we did talk about the Quartering Act and the Declaratory Act, correct? Or no? We stopped here, right? Stamp Act Congress?
Yeah.
Okay. So, Quartering Act of 1765. The British made the colonists house and feed British troops. This outraged many of the colonies. And it wasn't just house and feed them. They had to, like, I think I mentioned this last time, they had a whole laundry list of things and of goods and services they had to provide the soldiers. So much bacon, rum, beer, a nice bed. They had to make sure that things were clean for them. This really outraged a lot of the colonists because like these were like young men from across the ocean. And this is during a time where, say, a young lady didn't go to town by herself, right, without a male relative escort because it was seen as dangerous. So the idea of having a young man from across the ocean sleeping under the same roof, or possibly if it's a one-bedroom house, like a one-room cabin or something like that, the same room as one of their daughters, really disturbed a lot of the colonists. This made people very upset. And this was seen as not treating them as Englishmen either, because even in medieval times, a king would never dream of entering somebody's home without permission unless they were like in an act of war or something like that, because England's always had a tradition of respecting property rights and also people's homes. So this went very, very hardcore against their sensibilities. The Declaratory Act of 1766, Parliament repealed the Stamp Act, but it passed this law to replace it. This law stated that Parliament could pass laws with binding in colonies in all cases, whatever. I talked about this on Friday. So remember, this got rid of that hated Stamp Act, which essentially taxed anything that was official. Parliament saw it was losing money and popularity. And so they got rid of it, but they wrote a little clause in the law saying, okay, but we can do whatever we want in the future. We'll take this from you. No more tax, no more stamp tax. But we're going to come back and we can do whatever we want to later. So buyer beware, right? Yeah, I'll talk about this.
The
What's
sub said that you had a water main burst at your house.
Yeah, the main water line going to my house. A tree, a sweet gum tree, eventually got big enough to where its roots kind of popped it like that. And so I had to chop down the tree, chop up the roots, and dig up the line, cut it. And it was just PVC, just kind of a little pipe cutter. put little joints on, glue it. Wait a minute. It just took all day to get the tree and the roots and the dirt and all that stuff. No bueno. So I'm just glad it wasn't something like septic.
Oh, yeah, septic is hard to fix.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I just have to get somebody to do that because I want somebody with who just professionally dig it up and mess with that nasty stuff. Like I've helped install a septic system, but it was like okay because it was clean
Yeah.
and we rented a backhoe and all that stuff. Like I can't imagine like having to like fix a problem. When I was younger, I watched my stepdad have to fix one once because it was like backing up or something, but it was all the way back there. I was so happy he didn't make me help him. Like I had to help dig it up, and I like oh gosh, I felt so bad for him. That was nasty. So, note to self: I'm not a natural plumber. Okay, wait. Gosh, who was? I hated that I don't remember some of these pictures I picked.
Okay, I'm good.
And I remember who it is now. I remember. This is a picture of James Otis. He was one of those original Sons of Liberty, and he came up with the slogan, taxation without representation is tyranny. And that became the battle cry of patriots at this time. Before there was like a hot war, it was mostly propaganda, some peaceful opposition, people getting together, having discussions, and a little property damage here and there, but not a shooting war or anything. So, after, of course, the Stamp Act's repealed, later on down the line, we're going to have what's called the Townshend Acts. So, once again, this is going to be like an omnibus tax. So it's going to be like a bunch of things are going to get taxed at once. So, these are duties on tea, glass, and many, many other goods that colonists need. But for the most part, they have to import. They're not things that they can make in the colonies. Strict customs enforcement, military tribunals tried civilians and sent them to England or imprisoned them into the Navy in order to serve their punishment. So, all right. So you have these taxes, just like the Stamp Act. They're trying to tax a broad amount of things to squeeze some cash, but also to try to get a victory over these colonists. And this time, however, they're like, we were way too nice. These colonists were doing things like beating up our tax collectors, burning down their homes, and protesting and doing all these kinds of treasonous activities. So now we're going to send in even more of the military. And so
That's smart.
we see like a military tribunal is where you have a few military officers who are your judge and jury. And so if you were in violation of these things, you could be arrested without even your family knowing about it, disappeared, brought to a military fort, tried, and then put on a boat, either sent back to England, or you could be impressed. And impressment is when you're basically a slave for the Navy, essentially. It's like, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like forced enlistment. What's it called again? Like we did it in Vietnam last time. The draft. Yeah, it's like a draft, right? And you'd have to serve out a term for so many years. This is going to be a big problem because even after the American Revolution, even after we have our own government and all that stuff, the English are still going to go up and down our coast and eventually just snatch up a farmer here and there and impress them. Because they're like, no, you're still a British subject. And we need somebody to wash our laundry. And so, wasn't too good. So, how did they do this? It included writs of assistance, which were blanket warrants. And so, these were like, this person has the right to arrest and search anybody or anything they want to. So, And this was, of course, used especially in Boston, where they sent 4,000 troops to force this. Remember, Boston was the hotbed of this. It's where you had the base for the Sons of Liberty and all that. It's where a lot of the printing was being done and sent out to the other colonies. And so they thought that if they could squash this part of the rebellion, the rest of it will fall apart. So when you think about it like in old school military terms, you take your enemy's capital, you win. You take his king, you win. And they thought this was essentially that. Colonists again called for boycotts, however, and claimed that these writs violated their rights of Englishmen. Because, once again, property rights and the sacredness of your home, the right to due process, to know you're accused, to have a trial with a jury of your peers, these were things they expected as Englishmen. Not always written in stone, but definitely expected. But to be like kind of snatched up, nobody knows what happened to you. Like, I don't know, like fell into the water and kind of washed away, and the Indians got you, and you ran off to Canada. Nobody knew because the English didn't tell you. So it's scary stuff. Scary stuff. Let's go on to the next one. Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs. Hey, what's that?
It's somebody shooting somebody.
It's
Ah.
gotta be
It's
the English versus the or hobo American
the Boston.
massacre.
The Boston Massacre, that's right. And there is the first man to die.
Shot heard around the world.
Yeah, Crispus Attucks. He was a freed, or was it Attucks? He was this freed African American who was, I think was a dock worker living in Boston, participated in the protest. So there's been a lot written about the Boston Massacre, like who was right, who was wrong. Was it quite as bad as they said? They go too far. But we do know that this is going to be one of those things that is going to be big propaganda value for the Sons of Liberty, and it's going to be a great big black eye to the British. Because these protesters are going to go up to these British soldiers and harass them, just like they've been doing, like, to other British officials, like chanting slogans, throwing, snowballs with rocks in them at them, stuff like that. So they're pushing the limits. They're not just like straight shooting at them, trying to kill them. They're just trying to be like, hey, get out of here. We don't like you. The only reason you were sent here was to step on us. And we saw it as, tyranny. So in 1770, a mob of protesters heckled a small group of British soldiers in Boston. The soldiers guarding a customs house were pelted with snowballs and rocks. Someone shouted fire, initiating a volley from the soldiers. 5 Bostonians lay dead, including Crispus Attucks, the first to die. John Adams, the same one who's going to become second president of the United States of America, he was an attorney, and he actually defended these soldiers in court, even though he was on the side of the Sons of Liberty. Only 2 were found guilty of manslaughter. So the reason why is because they wanted to show that Americans really did want the rule of law, British law, to have real effect and meaning in the colonies. They didn't want anarchy. At this time, they didn't want to be like free of England. They wanted to be part of England. They wanted to be part of the country that they swore oaths to. The Sons of Liberty would use this incident as propaganda for their cause. And of course, the famous silversmith and printer, Paul Revere, named it the Boston Massacre in his publication. So like people would read this throughout the colonies, like, oh my goodness, they're just out there shooting people for no good reason. They're bloodthirsty British monsters. And as we already seen, they've been moving away from one another culturally for so long. And so many people were really upset about these laws being pushed on them without their say so. People across the ocean who didn't even like them, telling them what to do. And this is going to be seen as way too far for many individuals. And on the British side, they're going to be like, wow, what do we do now? Should we pull back? Should we go back harder? They were provoked. And so it's a really risky period. And you see this before a lot of wars. You have this period of buildup where it looks like everybody sees it coming, but they're having a really hard time getting out of the way. Kind of like before World War One. I mean, like right before the war started, we had this terrible assassination, and everybody saw what was happening for weeks. They saw it was getting worse. There was more and more propaganda, more and more saber rattling, and nobody could get out of the way. Next thing you know, Russia feels like they got to put troops along the border, and Germany says no way and attacks. So, boop. Hey, what's that? Surely you know what that is. Guys.
Oh, that's the Tea Party.
The Boston Tea Party. Once again, everything's
Indians.
happening in Boston.
They dressed as Indians, and they took tea in the harbor. And it was like, "Ooh, we're not gonna drink your
Yes.
tea, you filthy British people."
And one of the reasons why they did this wasn't necessarily only a protest against the British Parliament and Crown. This was a protest against their government upholding a monopoly, because the East India Tea Company held a complete monopoly on tea. However, they reached financial troubles. And so they appealed to the British government to force essentially the colonies to buy only their tea. And it was super cheap. They reduced the price a lot, but still, this was controlling your commerce. It was controlling your rights. And so the British thought, as long as they made things cheap enough, we'll comply. They thought it was practical, but they didn't understand just how much the colonies wanted freedom and liberty, economic freedom and liberty, over just, I don't know, getting by, really. And so, yeah, you're going to have this where they're going to dress up like Indians, go up on the boats, and they said they threw so much tea in the harbor that it turned brown, and so they made like salt tea, I guess, in the ocean. It was just tons and tons of tea getting dumped in there. Massive amount of money lost for the East Indies Company. And so, yeah. Oops. All right. So England then repealed most of the Townshend Acts in response to the Boston Massacre. And so, as you see, they're like, man, things got really too hot. We really wanted to exert control. We wanted to try to reap in some tax revenue. We didn't mean for people to die and to get all mad at us. Oops. So, however, later, 1773, the Tea Act is passed by Parliament in order to save the East India Company. This prohibited colonists from purchasing non-English tea. Though this tea was sold at a lower cost than normal, the colonists disliked the restrictions' lack of representation. Surprise, surprise. 60 Sons of Liberty, disguised as Mohawk Indians, boarded a British cargo boat and dumped 342 chests into the harbor. And so, this is going to be the straw that's going to break the camel's back. This is going to be the thing that's just going to be like way too far for the British to accept. And so, after this happens, that's when things are going to get a little bit more military law for the colonies, especially for poor Bostonites. It was pretty well organized. I mean, a lot of everyday people were in support of the Sons of Liberty. Whenever the British asked witnesses, like a big crowd came up to watch this happen. They heard the commotion, they came out and watched and were applauding and laughing. And when British officials questioned them, they were like, I don't know, it's just a bunch of Indians. I don't know how they got in there. And so they all pretended like they didn't really know anything. And the British got super mad about that. Super mad. I mean, it's like one thing to have like a few rebels. It's another thing to where like everybody's supporting the rebels. So, and It's basically an insurgency where the local population is on their side. And that's like your worst nightmare as an occupying force. If you're occupying a country and there's an insurgency against you, and the everyday people are helping, feeding, arming, and hiding out these people, you aren't going to win. You aren't going to win. You can ask the British or the English during their times when they were fighting Northern Ireland, or I don't know. England keeps finding themselves where they're like getting in like insurgencies.
Yeah, right. They're just like trying to get into places where it's not their hometown.
Pretty much. But that's one of the problems with colonization. When you're trying to have an empire and colonies, it doesn't always go well. Let me think. What's another one? Was it Rhodesia? I think, right? Was it, or was it not the Falklands, but kind of the Falklands? But that didn't really. That was more like country against country. What's the one I'm thinking about in Africa right now? It was before World War One. It was the Boer War. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, so they basically got and took over some colonies that were essentially Dutch people, and they didn't like the Boers. They were Dutch farmers who lived in Africa for generations and made their own communities, but they weren't willing to give up slavery, and the British had a war with them over it. But the thing is the Boers were very good guerrilla fighters, and they had the people on their side, and so the British were just getting smoked. And it happens a lot. Jeez. That's one of the reasons why I had so many problems in Iraq for a long time, and Afghanistan. Is in some places we would get the locals on our side, they'd help out. In some places you don't, and if you don't get the locals on your side, it's not going to help out. You can't find the enemies or any of that. Hey, next one. Hey, it's like we're having a Congress. So, and some oaths being taken. All right, so retaliation. So, in 1774, Parliament passed the Coercive Acts, which in America were called the Intolerable Acts. King George III and Parliament were outraged by the Boston Tea Party. These laws did these things. They closed the ports in Boston. This was a shipping city. Its only lifeline was to the outside world. They deprived Massachusetts of self-government. So they dissolved their government assemblies. Bostonites and Massachusetts was used to voting for its own representatives for their assemblies. And so this cut that off. They're like, no, you don't have permission anymore. Allowed British officials to be tried in England. So if you were a corrupt tax collector or British governor or mayor, and if you got in trouble doing something seriously illegal, you could go back to England to where a favorable judge and a favorable jury would hear you out. While the colonists didn't have that advantage.
they would have to go to an unfavorable judge.
Yes, a military tribunal. They issued an even stronger quartering act for the colonies, which the colonists hated. This led to the First Continental Congress that same year. So, same year, 1774. 56 delegates from every colony except Georgia met. Now, Georgia was still very like conservative in the way that it had more recent colonists from England. And so they were very, very pro-crown. And it was also, it's one of the newest colonies. They weren't quite as organized, I guess you could say. So First Continental Congress met. They pledged to boycott Britain. They also, however, they blamed Parliament. They didn't want to blame the king. They saw the king as possibly still being on their side. And that's a natural thing for people who live in like subjects of a monarch. They see the king as kind of like their protector, like a father figure, right? They're also going to drum up the Suffolk resolves, which they're going to form their own taxes and establish a militia and ignore the Intolerable Acts. So they're going to say, we're going to be in non-compliance with the law. We don't care. We're not paying these taxes. We are going to get our own people together in order to form a defensive league, a militia, which, like militias have been around in the colonies ever since the 1600s. So they were using these for like in the Indian Wars or the European Wars that migrated over, and even like emergency police work in some cases. They're going to form their own taxes in the hope that they can get people to volunteer money over to help pay for arms, and food, and supplies, just in case, right? They're not declaring war. They're not declaring independence. They're just saying we want to protect ourselves. And they're going to create a declaration of rights and grievances, and they are going to send this over to Parliament, who will refuse to read it and will say, you have no voice here. You're in rebellion. And so we're going to see that's going to be like a big no-no.
Big resolution time.
It's getting there.
Get to us.
It's getting there. So the Tea Party, yeah, once again, taxation without representation, and a government trying to coerce people into purchasing from monopoly. And then we're going to come back and we're going to see what actually starts fighting is essentially trying to arrest people without a warrant and confiscate their weapons. And that's going to be like enough for the colonists. And we're going to say no more of that. So please make sure that you come back and really go over that study material that I gave you. And we're going to meet back on Friday. All right. And see what happens when the war gets hot. Talk to you later, kids.